Welcome to day 20 of 21 days breaking through your matrix programming with Jona, Bryndis, and
Jeff Casper.
And we're going to be your energy coaches and energy healers here today, diving deep into the mechanics of energetic interaction, the nitty-gritty of our ego addiction cycles.
Yes.
Welcome. Thank you so much for watching. It's beautiful to have you guys all here. This is a live recording, so we take the liberty to comment or to respond to your chat messages here. But even if you're watching this video on the YouTube channel, please feel free to comment or ask questions. We'll respond to you. All right, yesterday we went into what it is that we can or that we need to do in order to recognize this addictive behavior of our ego, and learned that through letting go and shifting and continually correcting, that we can become more adjustable, that we can, attune to the situation and respond to it rather than react to it. Today we're going to give you a little bit of an overview and go into what we've covered so far, and then we're going to go into the one last piece that we have not covered yet, which is probably the hardest part. But for those of you who've been hanging out here or hanging in with us over these 20 days, you will find this rather rewarding, because there's a lot of new things that you're going to learn today that will illuminate some of your unconscious sabotage cycles, some of the reasons for these repetitive cycles that you get stuck in. And I want to go as far as saying that the mechanics that we're going to teach you today in this energy training lesson here are probably going to explain to you most of your unconscious attachments, if not all, and why you keep on getting pulled into them. But let's back up a little bit and do a review. This includes pretty much everything that we've already talked about. And if you start here on the kind of like 11 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock energetic condition, this is what we all find ourselves in. And once more, the first impression that you get here is that it's a circular thing, that is, or spiral, but more like a circle. It keeps repeating itself. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just in the nature of our daily exposure or daily interaction. So start here at energetic condition, and there's a lot of different factors that we illuminated that play into your energetic condition, inner and outer, and then there is an uncontrollable event,
right?
Like just something happens, all right? And now the ego addiction cycle starts. First, your energetic programming is being triggered. This can happen through internal or external triggers. We talked about this yesterday. It doesn't actually matter. No. The fact is, you have to deal with it right now, and your job now is to prevent it from latching on, because no matter whether this was triggered by somebody around you or by collective energies or by the news or
within yourself, just in general,
it doesn't matter.
Right?
You are now the one that has to deal with this.
It's on your plate.
Yes. And this is when we get into the 1 p.m., 2 p.m. region here of the circle. This is when your conditioning kicks in. All right. We have energetic propensities. We talked about this. Those have to do with our past. They can also have to do with our karma. But they can also have to do with our gender or with any kind of predisposition that we have. The conditioning that gets turned on has a lot to do with our past, which links us into the pain of the past and the fear of the future. So here you are now in the middle of your at first physiological reaction, namely your nervous system, fight, flight, or freeze. In behavioral terms, it usually plays out depending on our disposition that we go into conflict or contradiction with it. When we have a fight disposition, when we have a flight disposition, we go into avoidance. And when we have a freeze disposition, we go into numbing or distracting. And so here is where our ego's story begins to build, and where the inner voice, this critical inner voice that we've talked about, and the mental churning and the mental looping, where they get fueled. Okay, your ego story is in full motion.
Yes.
And then comes, of course, the actual behavior, the actual reaction to it, which is something that we call coping, because as long as we're caught in this cycle, we are not actually dealing with anything or facing anything. We're just merely coping. We want to get through. We want to get by. We just want to get out of there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the tricky part now about our ego is to understand that the ego works based on a few of these directives that we talked about. The primary directive is to either avoid pain or to seek pleasure, and that's why we get into this saturation cycle with our ego. It needs something now. It needs something to, like, either reward yourself or at least to get a temporary relief from whatever it is. All right, and in conjunction with our ego story, which fuels, some of our perception, we create this reality, this ego reality, in which whatever it is that we choose to cope with, no matter how unhealthy or dysfunctional, it's okay, because it's going to get us through. This is what we need.
Right.
All right. And yesterday and the day before, we talked a little bit about discovering the secret payoff, the secret pleasures, the unconscious reason why we keep staying in those things. So the things that we've identified as that the ego gets out of staying there. This very tricky, guys, a lot of subconscious stuff that's going on here. However, the energetic view allows us to, get closer to this and see really what is going on, what is truthfully going on there within myself. And so we are basically caught in our ego's function, which, just as a reminder, is not there to destroy you or is your enemy. That's a normal human function. This is how we enable ourselves to deal with extremely stressful or traumatic situations. All right, so don't ever forget this. However, the more we are caught in the red zone, the more we are caught in our ego states and our ego consciousness, in our ego perception, the less options we see we have, the less ways out we have. And so we are now under the complete and total influence of matrix programming. It plays out within us. And this is what we've defined as energetic attachments yesterday. These energetic attachments are in us. They come through the collective field that we are part of, and they play out in form of consciously or unconsciously resisting, consciously or unconsciously justifying things, consciously or unconsciously dealing with expectations, also fears here, so positive and negative expectations, consciously or unconsciously investing in a certain way we want to have things or we identify with. All right, and then comes the projection part, is where we use our powers or misuse our powers to make things look more the way that our ego wants them to see, basically to desperately make them match up with our ego reality, which is usually when also in conjunction with trying to cement our beliefs and really stay on this narrow path of how we see the world, which then cements the payoff, the need for gratification or the need for release, and leads to this perpetuation, these loops that we talked about yesterday. So this is when we are here at like 7-8 p.m. getting stuck in the wheel. All right, in the smaller dimension as well as in the larger dimension of, like, say, karmic wheel. And what we don't realize when we do this is that all this has to do with us externalizing our powers. We are feeding into our ego's projection of things instead of touch basing and so forth, all these modalities that we've shared with you here, and going into our heart and truly being present. We are buying into one story after the other, and then, of course, if the overall collective supports it, which at this very moment or this time in human consciousness development, it does support ego attachments, then through following sort of the current, we are also relieving some of our fears of not fitting in or not belonging. And thus we basically feed the collective matrix with our ego attachments, which then culminates as the matrix, if you will. This is something most people don't see. They don't see the connection between their own attachments, how it plays out, how they get stuck in the wheel, and how they basically not just fueling their own loops, but they're also feeding the bigger loop. And so many people are concerned about trying to heal the world, trying to save the planet. Yes, those are all things that we can do. But where do you think it starts? It does not start by going against the system or going against the matrix, fighting, against the evil forces. No.
That keeps you in it.
Yes.
That keeps you in it big time.
It refuels it.
Right.
It refuels your fight, flight, or freeze. All right. And with it, you're unconsciously feeding, the fear and the pain that is stored in the matrix. So the way to get out of this is, as we've already discussed here, through consciously or making a conscious effort, to disrupt these cycles. And here I've put together, and this gets a bit complicated, and you probably can't read it all, but the video will show this a little more detailed for you. Here, it's important to understand that the effort that we put in, the willingness, that the things that we are able to do, all right, that we begin to see this at every stage of the cycle, every stage of this loop. We have something that we can do. We have a strategy now. So I want you to focus on the red arrows and the writing here. Those are your disruptive strategies. Those are the tools that we've shared with you here, how you can disrupt the cycle. So let's go through this one more time. Here, starting at 11 p.m., an uncontrollable event happens. Your freak out moment has arrived.
Yes.
So what is it? What is the first thing you can do? Stop the whole machine right there. Go into I am breathing.
Right.
Release some of that. Like, don't try to immediately react. You don't have to react. Who says you have to immediately react? You can slow down. So we talked about this here last couple of days, and how this affects your ability to actually connect with and to see other options. Then, of course, when you feel your energetic programming kick in, and this is the place where, we've told you guys, okay, look, you got to really feel what's there.
Right.
You got to acknowledge that. You may not have a solution yet, that's fine. But you've got to acknowledge your true feelings and your true needs. If you never go into that place, you will forever be caught in this ego addiction cycle of externalizing your true needs and your true inner love. Then, of course, we talked about how to catch things from latching on, right? This is here at like 1:32 p.m. That the only way you can do this is to go into this inner discernment with yourself and make a congruence check. Is this truly how I want to be? Is this truly how I want things? And for those of you who are at the beginning of this journey, you can literally ask yourself at this point, do I really want to be like this? for the rest of my life? Do I really want to have all this? Because this is really that place. Remember, we mentioned this on a few other occasions. It's recognizing the beginning of the end. It's recognizing when you're being pulled into the red zone and when your cycles start. It's very difficult to disrupt the cycle once it has started, but it's the best here to go into discernment and congruence and ask yourself, what is it really that I truly need? What is it that I truly want? What do I need to feel loved? What do I need to feel safe? That's your congruent check, and that's where you can often uncover your ego stories, because they come up with all kinds of reasons why you need to do this, why you need to react like this. But you can disrupt right there. Now, let's say it's a little too late, and this happens to most of us. Your programming, your loop is already in full motion. You've already reacted, and you're like, darn it, and you see it like half a second after you said something or you did something, right? Then you have to work with your boundaries. Then you have to work with correction. You have to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, this didn't come out right, or what I just did, I apologize, this wasn't really what I truly meant. Or, hey, wait a minute, what you just said is really not okay for me. That really hurts my feelings. Or I find this not acceptable. All right, this is the part where you have to make a stance for yourself. And that has to do with your ability to feel and discern your boundaries. This requires a lot of training, guys, especially for energetically sensitives and empaths, because we have a weakness there when it comes to boundaries. Just on a side note here. And and then comes the part where we actively have to deal with our addictions, with our addictive behaviors. That's the hardest part. And we talked about this here at length. When we talked about letting go, because there are so many things that can play into this, such as inner child wounds, trauma and abuse, karmic attachments that we aren't even aware of, karmic relationship ties, all kinds of things play into why we need temporary relief or temporary gratification, all right, or why we need to keep our ego perception up. Because we've identified with all this so badly that if we would disrupt here, then we would have to admit basically that our whole entire life was a lie. All right, that's of course a bit exaggerated, but the ego really perceives it that way, which often is the case. To be honest with you, the fallacy of the ego perception creates a whole different reality. Yeah. And therefore matching up your ego reality with your energetic reality is requires a lot of training, and to not beat yourself up and to not fall into these pain and fear cycles that we talked about yesterday. So it comes down to if you want to really break through this addictive cycle, and with it your matrix programming, or the matrix programming in you, if you will, that you have to have the willingness and the courage. Yesterday we explained how you can work your way up to courage, all right, step by step, accepting that this is a step-by-step process and not an event. All right, anybody who believes that enlightenment means that all of a sudden from one day to another all your problems and all your propensities are going to be transcended is living in an ego fantasy. This is not going to happen. Enlightenment is not going to relieve you from all of that. And as a matter of fact, it is the other way around. All of this is going to lead you to enlightenment. Let's go further here so we can move on. And I do want to answer your questions and respond to your comments, guys. So please ask you, because this is the nitty gritty. We still have a few interjection points or intervention points here. Namely, when we are playing out our attachment, it's in full motion, and we are like completely caught in it, and we're beginning to realize this. Oh shit, I'm like really justifying this, or man, I've got resistance there, So you can still acknowledge here everything that you have learned in these other stages can be applied at any stage, and we recommend here to do honest self-reflection, to really, work with your inner feelings, your inner sensations, and your emotions. Follow up on them, do an inventory, and be aware of some of your vulnerabilities, because then you don't need to be afraid that they'll be uncovered, or you don't feel like you don't need to justify them
Right.
too much.
You move out of hiding, basically.
You're literally given away a lot of power by trying to hide things, by trying to cover things up. Remember, we talked about shadow and the parts that you cannot love about yourself, yet you've given away a lot of power at that place. And so remember that it comes down to your energetic awareness here now, to see how your unconscious sabotage, say, or some of these things that you have locked up in the basement, that you don't want to, or you can't face yet.
Right.
That this is the part here where, for most people, the biggest transformational healing takes place when you really go into this energetic awareness of what is really underneath all of that. And then comes the last intervention that is possible for you, and that is energetic protection. Energetic protection can happen through understanding a few more of the energetic dynamics that happen between people. So we do know that only 7% of our interrelation with the world or the other people happens on a verbal or body language level. And then there are some things that happen on a sort of micro signals and so forth. But it's roughly 85% of our interaction with other people, or the system for that matter, happens in the energetic realm. Wouldn't it be cool to know a little more about that? It's something that science only now discovering. And so we are at the forefront really here of teaching this to people. And it's eye-opening for most people. And why is this so important? It's not just important because the matrix is so hostile and you need to learn how to protect yourself. No, it is so important that you understand these mechanics and these dynamics, so that you can actually see clearly what your part in that is. I mean, it's one thing, of course, to strive for enlightenment and to sit on a mountaintop, and not having to work and not having to function in 3D. But if you are living a life, if you have a family, if you have a job, if you have a house or an apartment, if you have pets, you're going to interact. Okay? Unless you choose total isolation, which we have already explained why we do not recommend that, because it's part of a human need, and we suppressing a lot of things there, and also robbing ourselves from the mirror, from the feedback that we need to make corrections. So etheric protection is important in order to own our own parts, in order to move into full accountability, in order to become real. And why is that? There is so much happening on this level that we are completely unaware of, that you will come to the conclusion, and this is actually a really beautiful part of our job here of energy coaching and personal energy training, is that it allows you to really get to this place of compassion with yourself. You will come to the conclusion, wow, I had no clue that this was going on. I really couldn't see this before. This really helps, guys, in not beating yourself up or looking at yourself as a failure, or looking at your energetic dynamics as a mistake. No, there are some things that we do consciously, and we're going to look at these things. So we're not all innocent. However, this can only really occur to us as soon as we realize, the role that the ego plays in all of that. So why do we do this? I mean, we don't do this because we're evil. We do this because we are ignorant of it. And sometimes a little more ignorant than innocent. But for the most part, let's assume here for today that all these dynamics of energetic interaction between people or any living being, that they happen in your unconscious. Let's just assume this, all right? So you see this picture here, just as a general visualization, like how people interact. And this is actually a picture of a certain type of interaction. But in general, it is the acceptance that there is such a thing as this invisible interaction. And we're all empaths here and energetically sensitives. We know this, we can feel things, like how a room feels, like how the energy in a room feels, like even how the energy in a room shifts. Because we already in tune with our sensitivity. We just haven't learned yet how to put this to work correctly. Many of us energetically sensitives have a habit of or an energetic habit of projecting their energies out in order to maybe be able to read more of what is going on around them, or in order to maybe with the intention of spreading love and light to help others. Okay, let's just say it this way, because this is the reality of a lot of us energetically sensitives, namely that we are trying to manipulate the energy around us in some way. And this is justified, is valid that we do this to a degree. Remember, that was the chicken or the egg question. There can be a purpose in that, and many of us empaths actually feel attracted to trying to be of service, become a healer or something like that, because we have experienced that we can change the energy around us. It's just like a sorcerer's apprentice, that we go around and just like sort of wildly shotgun everything energetically, that ultimately produces all the pain and the trauma and the drainage that we experience. So lately in the mainstream, it has become very fashionable to point out energetic vampires and how like people pull you in and how you absorb negative energies from others. And that's all, it's okay to create that awareness. But there's one thing that is entirely wrong in most of these articles or pictures, and that is the actual dynamics that are going on.
Right.
Those can only be observed by someone who's trained in energy work. So really what happens is that, when we are in, like say, a social situation or some kind of relationship situation, is that there's a lot of stuff going on that we are not aware of. And let's still assume that we have the best intentions, okay? Every one of us does energetic projection. We do project our energies out, whether we are aware of it or not. It is a normal human ability. If you are a parent or have contact with children or with pets, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They can project their energy as far as many miles out, and you will feel the effects in you. There's a survival aspect linked to this. But not to sound too mystical, but projecting our will, for instance, is something that everybody can do. We can also project a better picture of ourselves. Remember the false self that we talked about here in the first couple of days. That's a form of projection. We're projecting out something that we are not, that isn't.
Well, it's a facade.
It's a facade,
yes, it's
a mask, so to speak. Then the problem, of course, arises that we begin to believe in it, and that disconnects. But any type of identification with something, any type of duality, any type of positionality, every time you have an opinion, you try to convince somebody, you are sharing a great experience, you're projecting your energy out. And there's some areas, entire economies that are built on this. Marketing, for instance, is commercials use a lot of energetic projection and sales altogether. So typically someone who is very good at energetic projection, especially mental projections, will be a good salesperson. All right, this is it, because you can mentally project to the other person a need or a solution for something. But there can also be mental projections in politics, for instance. We are actually experiencing this right now, where the politics in the US have a lot more to do with projection than with content. It's all about believing in a certain a picture that is being produced here. But of course, mental projection can happen also, maybe associated with the thinking of your mother, for instance, and then she calls you 5 minutes later. Okay, so it doesn't matter how you call this. We're trying to demystify this a little bit by actually sharing with you that these things go on and they're visible. So there is a connection that can come through mental projection. There is also a connection, and this is very surprising to most of you, that when you fantasize something, and this, by the way, counts especially for sexual projections about a person, this will be perceived by this person, even if the person doesn't know where this is coming from. In the energetic realm, nothing stays hidden. The most common types of energetic projection are emotional projections, such as, for instance, venting anger, venting pain, whining, or just simply like drama of any kind. That's an emotional projection. You basically make something bigger, than it is, through the way, through exaggeration, through your energy, through body language, intonation. You are pushing a lot of energy into whatever it is that you are sharing.
Right.
And often this happens unconsciously, and not always in this loud manner. This can also happen in a very coverted, hidden way. People can emotionally project to you, for instance, their victimhood. They can make you feel guilty. Also passive aggressiveness is, counts into the emotional projection.
You'll even feel them pull you in. That's a sign that they're pulling you in, and that's usually a sign that they're starting to project.
Right. You may not be able to identify where this is coming from and so forth in the beginning, but as you go on with energy work, and ultimately, once more, this is why we do this work here, namely training people in how to see this and how to work this, then you'll become much more aware of what you're projecting and what other people are projecting. Neediness is one of those projections that is very common in our collective matrix right now, because it plays directly into the externalization of our power and of our needs. So, like making somebody else responsible, feeling entitled, I deserve better.
They're seeking constant reminders of how good they are, how the approval they have.
Yes,
all
the
these kind of
seeking for approval and for validation is a very strong, unconscious, energetic projection that people do, and not to mention, of course, at last, power control and specialness. Power control and specialness is kind of like where everybody's ego wants to be. We all want to be special. We all want to be in control. We all want to be all powerful. We want to be a superhero. That's why superhero movies and stories are so popular, because it allows us for at least an hour and a half to feel like we have all these superpowers.
You got all the answers.
Yes. And this is even the most trained, experienced energy workers will fall for that one. There's several layers of that, and it will continually come in and trigger parts in us that then need to cope with a situation through energetic projection. But I want you to look at the picture here and just realize that there is a lot of undifferentiated, fuzzy stuff going on, and it produces and I'll call it this way, it literally produces a bullseye in the middle of your being, okay, that telegraphs out to the world, me, pick me, go send all your shit to me, all your emotions and all your projections. I'm open for this because I'm projecting myself out so much, that there's so much vacuum in me right now and lack of connection that I'm just like super, super willing, to absorb your energies. Well, as you can imagine, since we do this every day, we're already used to a little bit of contradiction that comes up in whoever listens to this, but this is the energetic reality. And quite frankly, until we get to this place where we can fully acknowledge that this is what we do too, then first of all, you won't be able to efficiently apply energetic or etheric protection techniques. But most of all, you will not be able to uncover really the depth of your ego addiction cycles, because they ultimately play out in projection. And this is something that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, because this whole woo-woo esoteric scene is built on projection, projecting that you are the fixer, that you can heal them, that so if they just project the light out, then, it will heal the planet. Forgive me for saying this, but this is total BS. It makes you susceptible, even more susceptible now, to collective energies and matrix programming, because you have no clue what you're doing. You are just pushing your energy out and leaving yourself uninhabited. Plus all the things, that you don't like about yourself, and the shadow and the hiding and all that. They often...
More bullseyes. Yeah.
They often, go hand in hand. And a lot of people who deal with unresolved shadow aspects, unresolved inner child aspects, are executing energetic projection up to the wazoo. All right? So energetic projection is basically our ego's turbo. If I can't get through with just, sort of my own little patterns here, let's just project that all out and make others believe
everything's okay.
Make other people's egos buy into it. But as we do this, we are leaving ourselves wide open. And this is probably one of the biggest etheric dangers here. Knowing what we know, if you can get... hold of that, and if you can acknowledge that to yourself and really work with this, then you actually have a realistic chance of breaking through your collective programming, your matrix programming, and the collective karma. Yes.
It's a big one.
The bullseye. Remember the bullseye, guys. So let's look at what we could do, in order to prevent this from happening. And of course, I mean, guys, we have a 1-year course around these lessons, okay? So if you think that you can understand all this here within 30 minutes, don't be fooled.
Right.
This is very, very complex. And your mind may think, oh yeah, okay, I get it, easy, but it is not, all right? This has a lot to do with practice. It has a lot to do with your willingness to go through some of your deepest and most painful inner revelations. But at the same time, also experiencing the most exquisite and most beautiful connection within, and your inner self-healing power, and your higher awareness, your higher consciousness.
Right. And never forget, as you work upon these things, that cycle, as you work to break down the ego addiction cycle that we talked about, and you begin to interact with those red zones we talked about to kind of break the system or break the programming, what you begin to do also is you align your energy to higher vibrational energies and solutions, that you'll begin to feel this. You'll see your trust increase, your confidence increase. You'll see your projections pull back a bit, and you'll actually get more energy and an ability to face these things. So the chance or the need to go into courage becomes easier and easier, or the ability to go into courage becomes easier and easier, the ability to face these things, because now you're rewriting your story, and that increases your ability to face the other part.
So Sandra's asking here that So if you are working on this one thing, you know, that's, you know, you're learning all this.
Mhm.
But what do you do in conjunction with like family members? How do you manage with family members that are not? And you don't want to move away from them, or you don't want to, like, you know, piss them off basically, but you got to protect yourself too. So on the behavioral level, the first thing you can do is to disrupt the pattern, as we talked about the last 2 days. Then comes the acknowledgement of your own parts.
Yes.
And go into like, you know, this is a cycle that's already 30 years old. I wonder why you know, what I'm getting out of staying there. So to really work with yourself, and then energetically, you can go into consolidation. And this is something that we have taught you guys here throughout these 20 days, how to do this without you knowing that you're actually working on your etheric immune system, on your etheric protection. And that is breathing through the heart, consolidating, pulling in all the excess stuff, whether that came from the outside or from your own attachment, doesn't matter. Pull it in and release it, as we taught you. Use grounding techniques, use connecting techniques, use self-clearing techniques, and releasing techniques. Everything that we talked about here these last 20 days geared towards these strategies. And then what happens, and this is the visualization in this picture, is that your energy begins to consolidate. It becomes very, very centered, very condensed, very inhabited. You step into your own energy body, and you fully fill it out with yourself. And it becomes round, it becomes whole, it becomes balanced, it becomes harmonized, and it becomes expansive. But the expansiveness that occurs through consolidation is not one that you can force. Is not one that you can control. It is the result of you consolidating, of you connecting and releasing and self-clearing. It cannot be faked. So as soon as you start faking that, you're projecting again, and you're back in your own bullseye problem, energetic absorption problem. Okay, so now come the questions, and we've expected that because this is a big one here for most of us. It's very difficult with partners who are normal. I know what you mean, normies, yes, that have severe childhood traumas. Staying loving seems to be the only way, but as well as keeping what you know, and, you know, staying with yourself. Yes, this is boundary work, Shri. This is what we talk about when we talk about boundary work, adjusting, correcting, feedback, and you have to know. You have to be able to discern. You have to be able to discern whether this is yours or his, whether this is coming from the inside or from the outside, whether this is expansive or contractive for you, whether this leads you into a loop, or whether this helps you to find solutions, whether it's based on love or the absence of love.
That's the big one.
That's what it all comes down to. We all have traumas. What happens energetically and what gets stored in our system is the exact same one. So we all have reasons, you know, why. But if somebody, and I don't mean no disrespect, we've talked about trauma and victimhood here before. But if somebody uses trauma and victimhood as projection for, you know, their, let's say, bad energetic habits, then even more so, it shows you that there is no owning involved yet. There don't have to be resolutions there. But, you know, there are some things such as trauma that stores in our physical that we cannot easily overcome just by mentally understanding it. But we can be accountable for it. You know, we can say, okay, this is a limitation that I have, and we can begin to work with our limitations instead of creating these big stories around it, you know, or trying to hide it, or doing all other kind of coping, but dealing with it or facing it. Yes, and Shri, the other thing that you mentioned here in your comment, otherwise they feel endangered if you know what they think and feel. Again, here you have to watch your own projections. You know, of course, someone who knows all this can be can easily go into superiorism and say, "Well, you're just doing this because of your ego. Oh, you're just doing this because of your childhood trauma." What are you projecting when you're doing this? Like, I've called it. I've told you so. No. What you want, if you dedicate yourself to being of service to others, and in this case, a relationship partner or family members, what you need to do is align yourself to empathy and align yourself to your inner higher power, which is basically fueled or basically propelled by the divine healing powers, and that's above your pay grade. So to tell somebody what is wrong with them never leads to a positive outcome, guys, unless the person asks you, and then you can give feedback. But the feedback that you're giving, and this is the last aspect here of today's lesson, has to do with your communication. And then that's ultimately the part where we all need the most practice, namely speaking from the heart and expressing our true needs, our true feelings, what we see, how we see the world. It could be anything, but the way we express and the way we communicate and the truth level of that and the alignment that comes across with it, and whether or not we project while we're doing it, all these things need to be practiced. But the good news is we all can do this. We all have the basic abilities in us, all right? But it requires dedication.
And practice.
And if you remember the first lesson, we talked about the difference between intention and purpose, and this is why. All the things that we've covered here in these 20 days, this is why. Because your intention doesn't get you very far. Your willpower doesn't get you very far. It runs out eventually. It's a contractive state. To work with willpower means to work with force. To work with intention means to work with your mind. Those bind you to your ego states, to your red zone. And so it's only a matter of time till something happens, till something gets triggered, and then you're off balance again, and then you go back into your old loops. The only way to truly out-vibrate matrix programming is to know how you can link yourself into your own source of power, how to trust in your inner higher power. And what we've been introducing to you here over these 20 days are the different strategies that are needed for this. And of course, also the educational material that goes with it. This is only a small proportion of what the Sacred Self-Healing course really covers, because the main thing that we could only get across once here, what was that day, 15, I think? Or,
15 or 16.
Actually internalizing your inner self-healing powers. That is the centerpiece of the Sacred Self-Healing program, namely to lead you to experiencing all this for yourself and not just mentally understanding it. We give the mental, the psychoeducational material with it just because for us that's open source. Those are all things that you can read up elsewhere, except for maybe some other things in etheric protection and interaction. That's really our specialty, and a lot of the stuff on the internet actually comes from us. But when it comes to like really living a life as a true self, becoming real and putting all this into action, then you will need the internalized experience. You will need to experience this for yourself. With your mind, you cannot get there. With your willpower, you cannot get there. All right. So this concludes day 20. Tomorrow is our last day. And once more, the shout out to all of you here who've been following us for these 21 days, or who have been working with us in the Sacred Self-Healing program or the Heart Warrior Bootcamp. Please send us a short video or audio recording or a short text of how these things that you've learned here from us, how they've changed your life or how they've changed your approaches This is what we need from you, you know, to continue doing our work, because that is the part that we cannot really fill in. We can only, you know, show people things, but then comes the experience part, and we would love to hear from you.
Yes.
How you experience this, so that it makes it more tangible for people who are at the beginning of this journey. Tomorrow we're going to do hopefully a short sort of compilation of that, and we're going to go through the summary, the wrap up of these 21 days, and then give you sort of the last missing ingredient for your journey of breaking out the matrix programming and fulfilling your highest purpose. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome questions, awesome comments here, guys. Oh, the energy work technique is etheric consolidation, and the transmissions are our personal energy training intensive called the energetic groundwork, the energetic perception, the energetic protection, and the etheric navigation intensives. Very loaded intensives with lots of information and practice for these things. Yes. Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow for one more time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.